Nobody saw the Christmas collapse coming, and now a loss that felt like a mercy might actually be a ticking problem for Green Bay. This matters because the Packers season suddenly has two competing narratives. One, they've clinched a playoff spot and can finally breathe. Two, they still have a razor-thin shot at the NFC North, but that path depends on other teams acting in ways that might not help them. Little things that look like good news on Christmas Day could make Week 18 much, much harder. Here's the setup. Detroit's loss to Minnesota on Christmas gave Green Bay a postseason lifeline. That Vikings win officially eliminated the Lions and by extension handed the Packers a playoff berth on a silver platter. NFL.com. But let's not sugarcoat what happened on the field. The Vikings win was decisive. Detroit's mistakes piled up in a 23-10 loss that ended their postseason hopes and left Jared Goff and the Lions staring at a season that fell short of expectations. ESPN.com. Now, for the twist you probably didn't see coming. That very Lions loss, the one everyone cheered because it made the playoffs easier to reach, also created a new strategic problem for the Packers. Green Bay's only realistic path to win the NFC North is narrow. They must win out, and the Bears must lose both of their remaining games. In short, Green Bay needs a perfect finish plus help. PFSN. So what's the snag? Week 18 pits the Bears at home against the now eliminated Lions. With nothing left to play for, Detroit has every reason to protect players and even consider sitting starters. That possibility suddenly changes the Week 18 landscape. A Lions team that's out of the race might not give the Bears the kind of competitive game that would help Green Bay's division hopes. And that's not hypothetical. Pundits and analysts are already flagging that Detroit could rest key players and that the fallout is more strategic than it looks. .ca.sports.yahoo.com. Hold that thought because there's a deeper, almost counterintuitive angle here, and I'm not revealing it yet. For now, remember this. Clinching early is a relief. But relief can come with consequences if the calendar and incentives don't line up in your favor. Fast forward to the immediacy of Week 17. Green Bay still has to beat Baltimore to keep that sliver of hope alive for the division. If they win and Chicago stumbles, Green Bay goes into Week 18 alive. If not, they're safely in the playoffs, but watching the Bears cruise to the division. The permutations are painfully small, and the margin for error is microscopic. Packers.com. Here's the part most fans miss when they celebrate a rival's loss. Once the Lions were eliminated, their only real levers are player health and future scheduling. And those are powerful. A meaningless Week 18 game becomes an opportunity to avoid injuries and, get this, to influence next season's schedule strength. That's not being cynical, that's basic roster management. Analysts, including the Athletics folks, have pointed out that finishing third versus fourth in the division leads to substantially different 2026 opponents. One path is much tougher than the other. Teams calculate that. Players and coaches notice it. The Lions do too. ca.sports.yahoo.com. Okay, here comes the reveal I held back. The Lions now have a legitimate material incentive to not beat the Bears in Week 18. On paper, that sounds insane. You'd think every team wants to win, but when finishing fourth lines up softer opponents, Arizona, Tennessee, New York, versus the brutal trio they'd face from third place, Rams, Colts, Commanders, or Seahawks/49ers depending on the West, the strategic incentive flips. There's a real documented difference in schedule toughness that could shape Detroit's offseason, and it makes the idea of resting starters or playing the kids infinitely more rational. ca.sports.yahoo.com. Let's be blunt about how that impacts Green Bay. The Packers aren't just hoping for help. They need a very particular kind of help. The Bears must lose Week 18. If Detroit treats that game like a playoff-level battle, Green Bay gets a shot. If Detroit treats it like a dead rubber and sits starters or loses intentionally by playing backups, the Bears are much likelier to win, and Green Bay's division chase dies. So the thing that clinched the Packers' playoff spot has also created a situation where their fate could hinge on an opponent choosing not to push hard. That's a lousy spot to be in. PFSN. Now let's talk consequences. For Green Bay, the immediate risk is seeding and matchups. Win the division and you're playing for an easier road and home field advantages. Miss it, and you might be a wild card team traveling into hostile territory. and that changes game plans, rest cycles, and everything about a postseason run. For the Bears and Lions, Week 18 is suddenly as much about future math as it is about pride. For fans, it's a gut punch. You cheer the rival's loss only to discover that you've been handed a puzzle you didn't ask for. There's nuance here that matters. The Packers' roster health is an issue. Quarterback availability, defensive rhythm, and injuries could shift the odds in either direction. And the Bears themselves have to beat San Francisco in Week 17 to stay solid. Any slip there changes the calculus entirely. But the central fact is this: the NFL's late season scheduling quirks and the strategic value of draft-adjusted schedules mean that meaningless games rarely are. They're choices with ripple effects. NFL.com's Abundant Perf. So what should Green Bay be doing right now? First, control what you can. Focus on beating Baltimore and Minnesota. Prep for different scenarios. If Jordan Love's status or any key player is dinged up, have contingency plans. Second, watch for signals from Detroit. If Dan Campbell hints he'll rest starters, the Packers need to pivot expectations and plan for a wild card route. Third, understand the psychological element. Teams that believe they were handed the chance to finish stronger via softer schedule will play accordingly. The Packers must guard against assuming other teams will behave like rivals with the same incentives they themselves would choose. The weird, slightly bitter truth of the NFL is this: the best laid plans are often at the mercy of other teams' incentives. A Christmas win that looked like a gift could end up being a poisoned chalice, not because Green Bay did anything wrong, but because the math of schedules and rest creates perverse incentives. Here's where we leave it. The Packers are in the playoffs. That's the headline. But the storyline that matters over the next 2 weeks is whether clinching early becomes a strategic curse. Will Detroit play like a team fighting for pride or like a team preserving for a softer 2026 slate? Will the Bears lose and give Green Bay a real shot at the division, or will clinched feeling let Chicago close it out? The season's direction now depends on choices that look small on paper but loom huge in reality. Which path will the NFC North take? Competitive closure or calculated preservation? Max Crosby didn't leave the Raiders facility quietly, and that alone tells you this wasn't just about a knee injury. Because when your franchise player walks out of the building after being told his season is over, that's not normal. That's frustration boiling over. That's tension between winning now and planning for tomorrow. And it puts the Raiders right in the middle of an uncomfortable truth. This moment matters because the Raiders aren't just bad this year. They're staring at the future of the franchise. Sitting at 2-13, tied with the Giants, Las Vegas is suddenly in a race nobody wants to admit they're running. The race for the number 1 overall pick in the 2026 NFL Draft. And Max Crosby wants no part of that. The official explanation is simple. Crosby has a knee injury. The team says shutting him down is in his best interest. A long-term